Hello, Angel.
Howdy.
How are you?
How are you doing, Doug?
I'm good, thank you.
Yes, sir. Apologies for the tardiness. I have a very needy dog.
I love dogs.
Oh, she's a sweetheart, but ooh, she keeps me busy.
How
Now
old
she's
is she?
gonna 6 years old.
What kind?
Pomeranian?
Oh, Pomeranian.
Yeah, she's
My
just
my last dog was a Chihuahua Pomeranian mix. I mean, I was so in love with that dog.
huh. What does that look like? A Chihuahua Pomeranian.
He was thin with long legs, and he was a character. Yeah, I'm so sad that he's gone. He died about a year and a half ago. He was over 15, so had a good run. So you could
Sorry.
probably see from this picture that Cadbury was more kind of Chihuahua than Pomeranian, but his mother was very, very Pomeranian looking. I had
Yeah.
his doggy DNA done, so he had a little poodle in him and Pomeranian and Chihuahua. It
Hmm.
was it was such a good dog, such a
Yeah.
character.
The city of New York, Boricua from the Bronx.
Well, welcome to the podcast. Please
Thank you.
introduce yourself and let everybody know who you are, what you do, and we'll just go from there.
I'm Doug Kari. Don't hold it against me, but I'm a lawyer by background. But my passion is investigative journalism, in particular, true crime. And I'm the author of a book that was released in March by Roman and Littlefield called The Berman Murders.
When someone says true crime, right? Because I see it all the time, and I just assume it's a mystery crime. Or what does it mean with that particular language? Like,
Well, true crime means that it's real. So the work that I do
oh,
involves real cases, real people,
okay,
and real human drama, as opposed to fictional stories.
what's literal? It is real crime. Okay,
Yeah, I work on real cases, and it's gripping. They're stories. And what I do is tell stories, but they're real life stories involving real people, sometimes in very emotional life and death, the elemental kinds of human dramas. That's what makes it fascinating for readers, is that it's real.
the Berman Murders. This is the first time I heard of that one, and I guess that's part of the reason you're doing it, right? Because I had never heard of it until I got the email about you coming as a guest and stuff. You willing to talk about that? Like share some of that story or
Absolutely. That's what I'm here for.
okay, great, great.
So this is a story, Angel, that I got into because I was in love with the place. Just to step back a bit, my grandmother was a prospector. After my grandfather died, she was in her 50s. She was living in Northern California. She took a trip down to Mexico and on her way back, drove through the California desert. She was a very artistic, spontaneous kind of lady, and she fell in love with the desert, ended up buying a cabin with no electricity, no water in the middle of a lonely desert valley. At first, she had water delivered by a truck into a big tank, and then later she witched a well. But she always had kerosene lamps for light and used a wood stove for heat, no air conditioning, and just lived out in this lonely desert valley. She became a prospector. Before four-wheel drives were really a thing, she was driving around the desert in four-wheel drive with a gun on her hip, staking mining claims, collecting relics, and also snipping pieces of plants, which she would then plant. And she ended up having this fabulous garden of
Wow.
native plants. That's the kind of woman she was. And because of her, as a kid, I just fell in love with the desert and the mystery and romance of it all. And ultimately, that led me to a place called Saline Valley, which is in central eastern California, east of the Sierra Nevada, west of the Nevada state border, near Death Valley. It's one of the most isolated locations in the western United States. And it was there in that valley in January 1986 that two hippie type campers just vanished from their campsite. That's what led me on a 9-year journey to understand what happened to them. I was very active in exploring the desert and going into that region. I remember when they disappeared. The place where they disappeared from is a clothing optional hot springs. What that really means in real life is a lot of hippies, counterculture types, desert rats all come out to these hot springs. People generally don't wear clothes. It's not a hookup spot. It's more just normal societal conventions don't apply. And people are hanging out, bathing in these soaking pools. It's a really cool spot. And it was just completely incongruous that someone would just disappear from a place like that and not be found. Getting lost, you can understand, but not being found. And then 3 years later, when their bodies turned up miles away in a shallow grave, everybody wondered what happened and why. And the case stuck with me for years. And finally, in 2014, I decided I was going to investigate. It just started out slow and then built from there and ultimately resulted in my book, The Berman Murders.
In 2014, that many years later, you could still find information.
I started by calling people I knew who then suggested other people to call. One of the most important phone calls I made was to the Inyo County, California Sheriff's Office. This is a rural county. I'm very familiar with the county. I own property up there. That's kind of home is where the heart is. That's a place near and dear to my heart. And I contacted the sheriff's office and they agreed to turn over their case files. The case was so cold, they thought it won't hurt. Even though they weren't required by law to do so, they said, if you serve a Public Records Act request, we'll give you the records. So I did. And then that enabled me to continue to go deeper and deeper with the case. Ultimately, I published a cover story in LA Weekly, and that resulted in some prison informants coming forward and saying that they had information about who murdered the Bermans and how it happened. Well, in the Berman murders, the chief suspect was convicted of later of sexual assaults involving young girls. And actually, Angel, coincidentally, just yesterday, May 20th, the U.S. Supreme Court denied his last ditch effort to try to overturn his convictions. I actually published an article that hit the web yesterday on the Long Beach, California Post newspaper about this final nail in the coffin, so to speak, for the chief suspect in the Berman murders. Now, he's never been arrested or convicted, charged, anything in connection with the Berman murders. But as I talk about in the book, years later, he went to Cambodia and set up in a villa where he was systematically raping and abusing and torturing little girls. I mean, children. And ultimately, it was so bad that he was brought back to the United States and stood trial on federal charges that he crossed a state line when he went to Cambodia with intent to commit these heinous crimes. And a jury convicted him on 2 counts, and the judge sentenced him to 210 years in prison. So if you're still around in 2220 approximately with good behavior, he may be eligible for parole.
They didn't know no chance for parole in those 200 years. Like, this guy's done. Is that how they did it?
He is done. He is done. And it was remarkable for me as part of doing the work on this story to go see the little girls that he molested, who in his final trial had grown up and become these elegant young women who were adopted by American families and now live in the United States and speak good English, getting up on the witness stand and confronting the man who abused them as children. The shift in power to see these young girls now with dignity and with force of personality describing very matter-of-factly what this guy did to them while he's sitting there in shackles was remarkable.
I guess one way or the other, he got what he got coming. You know, I'm always happy to hear a story like that because a lot of the time these predators get away with it, or they
Well,
are not punished properly, you know? So,
well, in the Berman case, there's a lot of people who feel that he got away with it. There was a deputy, a sheriff's deputy, who really was obsessed about the case for years, that Michael Pepe, the chief suspect, had skated and skated and skated, but he isn't skating any longer. But in connection with the Berman case, he has never been arrested or charged. The evidence is strong, but it's circumstantial. And he may have indeed gotten away with murder. But again, in our system, he's innocent until proven guilty. What I do in the book is I lay out the evidence, and then the reader can decide for themselves. But it's a very imperfect system, Angel. Justice often is not achieved. And in this case, if you look at it more broadly, I think justice was achieved, but not in the most perfect, open and shut, DNA tried, convicted kind of a way. It was a much more painful, protracted, and imperfect path to justice. But he's in prison. He has been for years, and he will remain there for the rest of his life. So if you believe he committed the Berman murders, maybe in some way his karma
right.
ultimately brought him down.
Well, as long as he's in there, I mean, it'd be nice to get the proper justice, but as long as he ain't coming out, it's good enough for me. I mean, I'd rather make him not exist anymore. People like that shouldn't be taking up oxygen, but we live in polite societies.
On that subject, though, Angel, I've always been in favor of capital punishment. I feel that part of society's function should be to exact retribution on behalf of society and on behalf of the loved ones of victims. So instead of having to take the law into their own hands and chase down somebody who did wrong to one of their loved ones, society will take that burden for them. The problem is that capital punishment is very difficult to administer. The system is imperfect. I think there have been documented cases of innocent people being executed. Also, the cases in which some people die and other people are allowed to spend their time in prison or even get paroled, there isn't real rhyme or reason why one case the person goes to the electric chair or the gas chamber or lethal injection or firing squad. Another case, they get out in 20 years. So because the system is so imperfect and because capital punishment is so cumbersome and costly to try to implement, I'm kind of doubtful on whether I still think it's an effective method. But I have to say, on a gut level, kind of on a mono kind of level, I feel that perpetrators of heinous crimes should be put to death. I mean, I know how I would feel if one of my children was killed by someone or one of my loved ones. I'd want them to go down, right? Who wouldn't, really?
Absolutely. And I'd probably, well, let me not set a precedent with my language. You know what I mean?
I do, but Angel, I think if you were ever, God forbid, confronted with that situation, I think you probably wouldn't, because there's no point in destroying your life in pursuit of destroying someone else's, as long as you feel that the result is going to be good
they
enough.
Walk, right?
But if they walk, yeah, all bets are off. I mean, for sure, if somebody was to just walk and you knew for a fact they had, it would be, that'd be tough.
Yeah, you're not gonna get away with that, one way or the other, one way or the other, something's got to give, But yeah, society, I feel like a lot of the times people get away with some really bad stuff, and you know. But you make good points about the death penalty. Like, I had to give that. I was very much for it, and then I had to take pause and realize some people are innocent, you know. And do we want to take the chance to kill an innocent person? That is horrible. That is horrible. Like, it would be such a horrible thing to put someone in the chair and they're innocent. Turns out later they're innocent, and you issue a posthumously apology to the family. Like, no, dude, that
Oops,
doesn't
yeah,
do anything. Yeah,
right,
my bad.
right.
Sorry. You know, so I guess in situations where there's beyond a shred of doubt, like you see the guy doing it, like you see it, there's no question, then there's no need to talk. Just, you know, it wouldn't be expensive, just a couple bullets to the head, you know, done. You
I
know,
know, but the practical reality is it is very expensive. Generally, they're housed in segregated housing, often in better conditions than in
right,
the general population. The cases drag on for years because the system provides them with all these legal protections. So it costs society so
right,
much time and money. I don't know. Again, I'm really on the fence. I've gone from being somebody who strongly advocates for capital punishment to somebody who's on the fence. Nonetheless, I will tell you, when I hear about certain cases and I hear somebody's going to be executed, and then I see what the facts are of the particular case, I'll tell you, my heart does not go out to them in most situations. You hear about these horrible, horrible things that somebody did, and you find out they're going to be executed for it. Well, I mean, yeah,
what took so long? I also don't feel bad for people like that. The biggest pause that I take with it is just, God forbid, that they're innocent. You know, that's where I really struggled with it. When I was thinking about it a couple of years ago, I really sat and I was really like, you know, just really trying to think where I stand on this thing. And I mean, there are some cases where it looks like they're guilty and it turns out they're not. And that is, I mean, look at some. Let me ask you a question. And on that vein, as a lawyer, you might be able to answer this, even with the true crime background. If someone accuses someone of rape, for instance, or sexual assault, and they actually lied about it. Later on, it's proven. Now, this person has been in jail, prison for X amount of years. They lose their life, reputation, and then it turns out they lied. Would that person who lied be punished adequately for that lie?
probably not. As a practical matter, things have shifted in a way. It used to be that women's accounts of having been assaulted were just kind of swept under the rug, or they would confront them with questions like, well, how come you're not bruised up? Did you fight back? As if being in fear and intimidated to the point where you just give in isn't
Right,
still rape or sexual assault. Of course it is. And in
right,
real
right,
life, sometimes it doesn't make sense for a victim to suddenly put up a fight when they're confronted in a deadly situation with an assailant. It's better to just submit and then try to fight back later through the justice system against what happened. And I do think there's been a real positive shift in the direction of understanding how sexual assault really works in real life and trying to address it. On the other hand, it can get out of balance when you have situations where a person can accuse someone of sexual assault and the accusation itself becomes the form of judge, jury, and executioner. Simply by making the accusation, the person against whom the accusation is made is presumed to be guilty and their life gets ruined. And there have been cases of false accusations and people trying to use the process as a way of, for example, gaining custody of a child or obtaining money or whatever it might be. So these are very difficult, those, very difficult cases. And that balance between victims' rights and honoring the victims and protecting the victims versus giving due process to the person that's accused and not just jumping to a conclusion. I don't think all of that's been worked out yet by either by our legal system or by society in general. It's really tough right now for people who are caught up in these situations on both sides. It's very, very, very difficult. And it's regretful because in the business world, for example, you see people doing things like men not traveling alone with a female colleague because they're worried that they might get accused at some point of having harassed them or hit on them or something, and or not having meetings alone, whereas with a male they might do it. There is no perfect way to address these problems, and I think it's better at least that we're understanding more about sexual assault and trying to do more to address it, because it was balanced against women. There are so many rape cases and sexual assault cases that went unreported because the victims were just terrified and felt nobody would believe them.
And they get away with it a lot of the time. That's the kind of stuff I was talking about in the beginning, that a lot of these criminals who assault children, women, they get away with it, or they'll get like a year in prison and then they're back out. It's just really bad. But then I feel like if a person is proven, like it's beyond a shadow of a doubt, proven that he or she lied, that person, in my opinion, should receive the same punishment that the accused received. So if the accused spent 20 years, so I've seen stories of people being released because they found evidence that it was a lie. If you lie about it, I feel like you should be punished. You should not be able to, because you've ruined, in effect, someone's life. So if they went to prison for 10 years because of your lie, then in my opinion, I have no legal, but I feel like you should spend 10 years or double that for lying, just for the lie.
Anytime somebody abuses the legal system and brings that kind of impact down on somebody, whether it's swatting them and calling the SWAT team to their house as some sort of a sick prank, or accusing them of a crime that wasn't committed, particularly assault, if it's proven to be untrue and malicious, they should suffer serious consequences. Otherwise, the system can be weaponized against people. And it's not, just women falsely accusing men. It's all kinds of iterations of it. But again, I have to come back to the fact that it was, I think, historically unbalanced, so that women and other victims of sexual assault were not given a fair shake. They tended not to be believed. And there was a lot of horrible criminal behavior that went unreported and unpunished because of the way that the system operated. Michael Pepe, who I talk about in the Berman Murders, that's why he went to Cambodia, because he knew that the system there just didn't protect children from being victimized, and that's what he was doing. He had set up shop basically to victimize little girls. And I'm not just talking about having some sort of a sick romantic type sexual relationship where he thinks he's in love. I'm talking about actual torture. That's what he was doing. And as I suggest in the book, I think it reflects on the nature of his character in a way that it might provide an explanation for why the Bermans were murdered in Saline Valley years earlier. That same kind of horrible, deviant behavior probably wasn't something new, probably didn't manifest when he was a 50-something-year-old man. It was probably there in his 30s at the time the Bermans died. And so it provides a context for what may have happened.
Now, when he did those crimes with the little girls in Cambodia, right?
The reality of trafficking in some of these desperate countries is that it's actually the families who sell the little girls into the situation as a way of earning money for a family that's in desperate circumstances. Cambodia is a country so racked by poverty and desperation, particularly for the underclass people, for example, ethnic Vietnamese. As a practical matter, they really don't have rights. They don't have economic opportunity. So in the case of Pepe, he was actually striking deals with the families, in particular the moms, to obtain the little girl's services. The mom sometimes would be the one that would deliver the little girls into the hands of this person. And that was part of the back and forth that went on with all this. The dynamics were extraordinary and horrific. I mean, imagine you're a 9-year-old girl and your mom drops you off at the villa of this 50-something-year-old man whose intention it is to rape and torture you, and then your family is going to make money because of that. That's the situation that the police and agents from ICE were faced with when they were investigating Michael Pepe in Cambodia. Just the horrible set of circumstances. The good thing is that the girls were then taken into a shelter run by Christian aid organizations in the United States. And over the course of months and years, they were healed. They were schooled. They were allowed to be children again. They were allowed to do therapy where they could understand this wasn't their fault. This didn't make them bad, that they were actually good human beings with opportunities. And then they were adopted by American families, educated, learned English, and now have blossomed into these amazing women, some of whom are turning around and going back into the trafficking world, only this time to help victims. Others of them just going on in their lives to get married, have kids, and have a wonderful life and contribute to society and enjoy the world the way that they should. One of the things that I've learned out of all this is humans are very resilient. A lot of times people can endure even savage kinds of things, and they can persevere and ultimately overcome that and have a good life and not be tortured by what happened. People are very resilient if they have the right tools and the right help, and these unresolved issues don't just linger, they can rise above it.
Bro, that is sickening.
Yeah, tough
That
stuff.
is...
I didn't know when I got into the story. I mean, imagine I'm a guy who loves exploring the desert. My grandma was a prospector, all of that. Me and my buddies, we would go out and do desert mountaineering, do these expeditions. And then I hear about these people that disappeared later. They turned up murdered. And I decide, okay, I'm going to dive into this case. I didn't know that it was going to take me to the other side of the world. And all of a sudden I was going to become an expert in the trafficking of young children. But that's the direction that the case took me in. And as an investigative journalist, you follow the story wherever it goes. And so I got into it and learned about it. But again, for me, the ultimate part of it was seeing these girls as healed, strong, dignified, and coming in and triumphing over the man who abused them. That was wonderful. It was really wonderful to see a triumph for the human spirit and to see that kind of justice playing out in real time in a courtroom in Los Angeles. This isn't in a movie. It's in a courtroom in real life up in LA, sitting there watching these young women and just being awestruck by them and by their strength.
Yeah, I can see that. I still feel, based on what you've told me, unsatisfied. Like, you know what I mean? Like he deserves so much worse. Just off of that, we're not even talking about the Berman aspect of it. Just off of that aspect of it, that guy should.
Well,
I don't.
if he is responsible for the deaths of the Bermans, and as the book outlines the evidence, there is strong circumstantial evidence that he is the one who killed them. And there are many people who believe that he is the perpetrator, including the surviving friends and family of the victims. If indeed he is, he robbed the world of two really beautiful and interesting people. Louise was 17 years older than Barry. She herself was a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, one of her mother's many lovers. She had had a tumultuous life herself. Barry was her fourth husband. She had been everything from a 1950s secretary to a wild child of the 1960s, partying, doing drugs, all of that. Barry was younger and he had grown up in the most fabulously wealthy circumstances, completely different life from hers. His father, Jules Berman, was a legendary Southern California entrepreneur who was the man who owned and built the Kahlua brand of liqueur. When he bought it, was just an obscure Mexican liqueur selling maybe 1,000 cases a year. He built it into a 1,000,000 case a year international business. He had a yacht named Kahlua, a mansion staffed with servants, a garage with Maserati, Rolls Royce, Ferrari, you name it. He went from there into real estate and just leveraged even more, was involved in massive real estate development, owned these fabulous properties himself. He got into oil. I mean, the guy rolled really big. And his son, his only child, wasn't impressed at all, really kind of rejected his dad's wealth and wanted a more simple life. And him and Louise were both disciples of an Indian guru. And they were into transcendental meditation. Barry liked to work with his hands. So here you have these two people who leading very simple lives when they could have just been in the lap of luxury. But Barry just wasn't impressed by that. And it made him very interesting and very admirable in a way. I mean, I don't think I would have made the same choices as him. I just have to be, I have to
Yeah.
be honest. I like to tell people, oh, if I won $1 billion in the lottery, I'd get a Ferrari and a Lamborghini, and I'd fly private, and maybe I'd be dating cheerleaders, but I wouldn't let it change me.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a joke,
I'd be the
obviously. I'd
same
like to
person.
think I love my wife, and she and I are so tight. I'd like to think that massive wealth wouldn't change me in a profound way. But who among us can say that really? You'd like to think, oh, yeah, I'd keep my center. I would still be the essential person that I am. But you don't know that. But Barry, he did know that. From the time he was a child, he just didn't buy in to the materialism of the Beverly Hills world in which he grew up. He could have had it all. His dad would give him anything he want. He didn't want it. He came home from college one time, and the only car available to drive was like a Ferrari, and he wasn't interested. He told his dad, I'm going to go rent a Ford. I don't want to drive around town in a car like that. Me, I probably would have been driving the Lambo. Well, Dad, if you insist.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
when in
actually,
Rome, Yeah.
I like to believe that if I came into massive wealth, I would still, I would still be good to people. I would like to believe that. And like you said, you just don't know. But I never talk down to people, you know what I mean? But like you said, you just never know. But this
You just
guy
don't know.
sounds,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, there, I've read about psychological simulation games where within the context of the game, people become more wealthy compared to the other players, and it tends to bring out bad personality traits from what I've read. I'm not an expert in the area, but from what I've read, it does tend to bring out more hard-edged personality traits. And so I think people who are fortunate enough to have wealth have to learn to recognize that and to remain human and keep a sense of perspective and remember that we're all just human beings on the planet Earth, and none of us are taking any of this, with us. And so I very much try consciously to engage with people that might be in a situation where you would look at them more as a service person. For example, you're getting your car washed somewhere and there's guys that are washing your car, drying it off for you. Do you just throw them a few bucks and act as if they're not really other human beings you're interacting with, or do you try to say hello and look them in the eye? Here in Southern California and Nevada, where I spend most of my time, it's really a bilingual kind of an environment. So it's important, if you're really going to engage with people, to speak two languages and not just speak one. I focused on learning enough Spanish that I could be conversational because I didn't want to be the gringo who was holding myself out as being different or looking down on people who might be providing more of a service role in the way that I was interacting with them. And so it was, that's important to me. But I have no doubt that if I came into a large amount of wealth, there would be some hopefully not, but I really don't doubt that my behaviors might alter in a way that weren't all positive. I mean, I think it'd be really hard. That's part of why, and you'll see it in the book, why I admire Barry so much. He wasn't trying to not be affected by wealth. He genuinely wasn't. He genuinely saw the bad parts of it and pushed back against it from the time he was just a kid. His best friend when he was young, who is now a celebrity plastic surgeon, spent a lot of time talking with me about Barry's character and explaining to me that Barry was just different. He was this rich kid growing up in Beverly Hills, and he just didn't buy into it at all.
It'd be nice to be able to, figure out why.
So I did try to investigate that, and it seems it was really something that was just part of him from the time he was born. But also when he was being raised, I think he looked around and saw other families, friends of his who had families where there was a lot of warmth and love in his family. And he was probably the wealthiest among all the kids that he knew. In his family, there wasn't a lot of love. His mom had grown up in a very wealthy New York family. She was the kind that got sent off to a Swiss boarding school when she was young. And she was very cool and really outsourced the mom part to servants. And Barry's dad, Jules Berman, was running around the world doing deals. So he loved his son, but he just didn't have a lot of time for him. And I think for Barry, he felt that lack of warmth, and he valued that and missed that, and didn't feel that money was a substitute for that. Made him not value money as much because he knew on a gut level that the love that he wasn't getting from his parents is what he really wanted, and that was more valuable than what they gave him. So it made him suspicious of all the wealth and the things that they threw at him.
I always think like money changes everything and makes your life better and stuff. I deal with mental health stuff. I had like panic attacks and depression and all this stuff from my own childhood, growing up in the Bronx back in the 80s and 90s, a very violent time. And I always think, well, if we have more money, whatever. But I know a lot of people, I know of a lot of people who are very wealthy and they're still dealing with this shit. Some of them kill themselves.
Very much so. I have a good friend she's a Grammy Award winning artist and producer named Star Parodi. I've known Star for years. We often talk. And she said something to me once that really hit home. I was talking about how money can't buy happiness. And she was saying, money can't buy happiness. However, lack of money can bring unhappiness. So I think it is important to understand that having resources is critical to survival, and also an important component of building a happy life to a point. I think studies have shown, though, above a certain level, it really doesn't change the quality of life much. Does it matter? Would it change the quality of life if I've never flown private, but I don't like Jones to go fly in a private jet. It's like, whatever, I think at a certain, and I'm starting to get older too. So as you do that, you start to see, this ride isn't going to go on forever. One thing I don't look for is how glitzy of a life can I lead in the time I have left. Instead, especially as a writer, you're looking for things like authenticity, connection, and really understanding the world. I'm attracted more to stories, to interesting people, just to the life around me and the experiences of everyday life, as opposed to wanting to jet off and do wild things. I got offered a free Super Bowl ticket and I turned it down earlier this year. I wanted to spend a weekend working on writing. It's a several day experience by the time you go there and do all this, and I just wasn't interested. I was like, I'll catch the game on TV.
It's easier that way. You know,
And it's a set of values. That doesn't mean I'm not as material as the next guy, but I think as we get older, maybe what we're seeking to do in our lives maybe changes a little bit. I mean, why do you make a podcast? You're wanting to do more than just live for yourself. You're making something of value to other people. And by doing that, you're leaving a part of yourself
that's exactly
behind,
it.
as it were.
That's
Yeah,
exactly it.
you're building a legacy.
That's exactly it. Like I am so afraid of not existing and just, well, I know it's gonna happen, right? Within a generation or two, no one will even remember who I am, right? That's how it goes, right? Once all your loved ones are gone and no one will remember who you are. I mean, even the biggest celebrities, the biggest people who have done the greatest things for humanity fade to history that no one even remembers who they are. You know what I mean? So
Except
I
for
know,
Elvis.
but even, yeah, he's still known.
No, I know, but it becomes more mythology than a real human being. And you're absolutely right, but I wouldn't be so sure about that. I would guess that within your family and circle of people that you're close to, that even generations from now, people will look back at your creative work and they'll find it fascinating. And I know my father passed away, gosh, 20, almost 24 years ago. I think about him more now than I did then. And I talk about him a lot to my kids. And I also try to create images and stories that will hopefully live on.
How
And
old are your kids, if I
so
can ask?
I have four, three,
Mhm.
three kids and three kids that are mine biologically and one who's a stepdaughter. So my kids range in age from 36 to 23.
Okay. Adults. Now, let me ask
Yeah,
you this.
adults.
Do you think the children of their children will remember or know you? Like that's where it happens. I feel like that, you know what I mean? Like their children, provided you're still around, which we hope you are, will know you. But then their children and their children, and in some cases, you're actually the person who gives them their wealth or their name or whatever, like if you look at the like the super rich families and stuff, and nobody even knows who they are. Like, and that saddens me and scares me because if those people can fade, what does that say for us? Beyond my son, right? Like when my mom is gone and my sisters are gone, and my son, maybe if I'm around, his son, but beyond that, we cease to exist.
I don't agree. I mean, I've been creating legends about, for example, my desert grandma. My kids very much are impacted by her and know who she is. So that's the
Oh,
children
right.
of her
4 levels
children.
deep.
Yeah,
Right, right.
yeah, we're going to continue those family legends. I think you have to work at it and you have to want to pass along the legends and the story of your forebears. But
Mhm.
I think if you make that a priority within a family and you teach your kids to do that, these things will pass down and influence people. Because I think when people feel lost in their lives, unsure who they are or where they want to go, that it's helpful to be able to look back and say, well, where did I come from? And if you know that you had an interesting parent or a grandparent or a great grandparent, and you learn a little bit about their lives, it does inform you in a way. I'll give you an example. My youngest son is a historical interpreter at Alcatraz prison on Alcatraz Island in San Francisco. He got a degree in history. Lo and behold, he goes to San Francisco and gets a job, and now he does research and leads tours on Alcatraz. It's fascinating stuff. And in his mind, he's carrying on part of the traditions that were set by his great great uncle and great great aunt. My grandmother's sister was someone who operated a bar along the waterfront of San Francisco back in the 1920s. She had a pistol that she kept under the bar, and she was a very colorful character. She married a guy who had been a sailor, and they just had a colorful life. They made enough money to kind of live large. And my son now wears the ring that she designed for her husband, and he sees himself as tying into part of the history of the folks in our family who were in San Francisco several generations ago. So he never met them, he didn't know them, but we've kind of made them a myth. So I think your family is going to turn you into a myth. Why wouldn't they? Here's a guy who had a podcast at a time when podcasts had emerged and become a thing. They get to go back and see you and compare. They'll compare and say, oh, so and so looks just like Angel. And maybe they even name their kid Angel. I mean, I think we can live on in these ways. I really do.
Well,
I'm not
like
as
that.
pessimistic about it, but maybe that's just me dealing with getting older. Of course, they'll remember me. Don't we want to be remembered?
Like I was asking my mom about my pops and her parents and his parents, and there's nothing. I got nothing. You know what I mean? Like my mom can tell me a little bit, but I'm like, can I see pictures? Can I can I know how they were? What about your grandparents? And there's nothing. With my pops, everything went. On his side of the family, everything went. And that's the fear I have. That's why I record, that's why I write, that's why I put everything everywhere. So even if things go away, maybe it'll exist in some place.
But I think that because you recognize that, and I agree with you completely, I think you and I share that we're committed to the idea that we're going to try to leave something behind. We're going to leave stories there. And not only that, we're going to tell our kids these stories are here and they're available for you. And it's important that because someday you're going to want to come back and see this. When you're older, you're going to want to know who you had in your past, where you came from. And if you teach them those same values of preserving the stories, creating their own stories and memories, and handing those down the same way you would hand down any kind of a legacy or an heirloom within a family, then you can create a culture where that becomes important. And that'll be really important to people who follow you. You don't know. I mean, I could imagine in a couple of generations, one of your descendants might write a PhD thesis about you and the origin of podcasts in the 2000s and use you as a case study and for what kind of a legacy. Trying to do something to leave a piece of yourself behind is a human instinct, and I'm very committed to it. Besides, doing writing, investigative journalism, and writing a book, and now I'm working on another book, I also crank out Shutterfly books for the family because I feel like I shouldn't just make books for the public. I should make books for the family. They're very simple books with pictures, but I think I mentioned to you before we started the show that I miss my dog who passed away a year ago. First thing I did after he passed away after 15 years was make a book about his life so that in the future my kids or their kids might go, oh, here's that dog that Doug loved so much. And just do that about family, about friends, and try to create some legacy, because who among us wants to be forgotten? And also, just like you would like to look back, I like to look back. And it is disappointing when you find out that there is no information available there. I'll give you an example. I had a great uncle who was a seafaring man. He was a carpenter on a ship. Kari is a Finnish name. My family is of Finnish origin, and my grandparents on my dad's side immigrated from Finland. So there was this Uncle Carl who I think he might have been gay. That kind of thing didn't get talked about back then, but it's kind of what I feel like maybe that explains why he was a bachelor all his life and liked to go to sea. I could be wrong, but I think maybe I'm right about this. And when I found out that he had been a prisoner of war during World War II, that he was on a merchant ship after Pearl Harbor was attacked, and his ship was sunk by a torpedo by the Japanese, and he spent the rest of the war in a prison camp in Shanghai, China. I asked my mom, what did he go through? What was it like for him? By then my dad had passed away. I said, Mom, what did Uncle Carl say about this experience? And she said, I don't know. I never asked him. And I thought, oh my God, I mean, he lived through this piece of history. I would love to have that.
Right.
Well, we all, maybe our personal history isn't as dramatic as Uncle Carl's, but we have our stories to tell. And I think if we tell those stories and we capture them, there's meaning in that. And so I think what you're doing provides that meaning. Someday, somebody you've never met who was born after you're gone is going to be watching one of your podcasts and saying, wow, he was cool.
Maybe this episode. So, hey, descendant.
There you go.
You know,
Hey.
how's it going, descendant? I hope we've kept the trajectory of improvement per generation. That's my message
There
to
you
the
go.
descendants. I like your idea about Shutterfly. That moved me. Even when you said that, it moved me. I felt emotional. Like, wow, okay. Because quickly started making one of my little sister, my baby sister. And that just
Oh,
moved me. I do like that. And I think it's a good idea. Start telling stories. Because I usually tell my stories, right? I was sitting on a car. This guy grabbed me and started shooting at another car. My experiences growing up, I share those stories, you
that's a
know?
good story.
And it happened. Like, I was used as a shield. The other guy had a gun too. And had they opened fire, I don't think I'd be here anymore. They didn't shoot. They looked and they saw this stupid kid being held as the guy shooting at them. And I guess they didn't want to kill an innocent kid. They drove off. So I share that story occasionally. I think I should tell stories like of what you're saying, like you did of your dog. I could do that of my sister. I figured it out, dude. Completely unrelated. I've been trying to figure out what your look reminds me of, and I got it. Tommy Lee Jones.
Nice.
I have been this I've been trying to get it, especially when you're like just like with no expression and kind of looking and stuff. I'm like, what am I seeing here? What am I? Because there's a familiarity, and I've been trying to peg it, and it just hit me. Tommy Lee Jones. Go look around and find random pictures of him, and put yourself kind of like with like just a standard face next to him, and you'll have to see it. You
Well,
know?
hopefully I'm nicer than him. He has a very poor reputation
Oh
as
yeah, I did
being a
not know that. Yeah.
difficult guy in Hollywood.
Oh, I didn't know that. I love
Oh,
his movies. Like,
he's wonderful, but man, he's got a tough reputation as an actor.
oh, so
Oh
he's
boy.
like one of those rich people that we were talking about earlier.
Well, from what I've read, he's just very particular about his acting and his persona, and he's just not real warm and engaging guy to work with. But I think a lot of artists are difficult people. I've known some. I did entertainment law work when I was a lawyer in LA, and people who are artists often are very difficult, multifaceted people who often have a lot of stuff that churns through them, depression and anxiety and all kinds
Eccentric,
of
you know.
issues. Yeah, sometimes it's better to just see the surface and not necessarily want to get in and know the real person, because they might not be the same as the characters.
Don't meet your
Yeah,
heroes.
yeah,
I've
yeah.
I've had a lot of comedians and actors on, and these are the things we talk about, like depression, mental health, coping with these things. Models, the same thing, that have come on. They deal with a lot of those difficulties. So did you get like a degree in journalism as well, or you just use your skills from lawyering into that world?
More that I used my skills from lawyering. I have a degree in English from UC Berkeley and went into law. Law involves a lot of research and writing. So I became a pretty good legal writer, and you learn how to research not just the law, but how to investigate facts, interview witnesses, take depositions, do all that. And a lot of that translates very well into investigative journalism. You also have the confidence to go out and ask hard questions, to be persistent, to know how far to push and when not to push. And then also I sometimes will push quite hard with, say, public agencies. I sued a public agency in the last few months to get public records that they were refusing to turn over, and I got the court order. Other people hear about that and they know you're serious, and then that gets folks to be more cooperative and learning to be tough, learning to not be put off if someone turns around and starts attacking you, or not taking things personally, and really wanting to get the story, get the answers, and then not being afraid to write down what it is you find. Those are things that are essential for doing true crime, because they are very difficult stories, and you have to be able to push through all of that to try to find out the truth. The other thing that the law helps teach you is to try to be objective about things. As a lawyer, you're typically representing one side or another, but that process actually makes you very attuned to the counter arguments, because you have to always be thinking, what's the other person's perspective? And actually, you generally, if you're in a lawsuit, you really get to know the other person well and understand their motivations. Many times the lawyer is almost like the go-between their client and the other side, to try to resolve the dispute and bring the parties together and come up with a resolution. All those skills help for journalism, because you have to be able to see multiple sides and really have a commitment to the truth to do good investigative journalism. You can't just become an advocate for one point of view. That's something else. That's not journalism. Journalism is about doing your best to find the truth, and recognizing your own biases, your own tendencies to jump to conclusions or to try to have a particular outcome, and to consciously step back from that and just let the facts go where they will, and not be afraid to go there. And if you're not getting what you want, to really try to push and dig to get the answers. I really enjoy the process because of that. The writing is very hard and it consumes massive amounts of time. It just destroys other parts of your life. Everybody sacrifices when you're a writer. Your family, your friends, everybody sacrifices, because you're just not available for a lot of things. Are you going to spend a weekend committed to your craft? Or are you going to go party in Vegas with your buddies? I made a choice to work on my craft. Those are real sacrifices. For me, it wasn't that hard. Harder for me is when I'm sacrificing time with family or things like that, because I'm going to focus on the writing. And you hope that it serves some purpose, but you just do it. You just push through and you do it.
Well, it sounds like you do real journalism. I feel like the news nowadays is mostly opinion on both sides, rather than, you know what I mean? Like if you watch Fox News, you're gonna get the right wing opinion. You watch CNN, you're gonna get the liberal opinion, rather than just actual facts. People don't really do that anymore in the news. I don't even watch them anymore. I don't even know what to believe. Like right
It's a
now,
business. It's a
yeah,
business,
yeah.
Angel. It's a business. And they're being pushed very much to keep their numbers up. And in order to do that, they find that it's better to play to one side or another, and to create a brand that plays to one side or another, because a lot of people, they're not really looking for the news. They're looking to hear what they want to hear, and to have things spun in a direction that fits with their belief set. I'm fortunate because crime cases don't tie into those political
Politics, right?
divisions that are roiling the country. It's different. And also, I'm fortunate that writing is a passion for me. Investigative journalism is a passion. I don't have to make a living out of it. I am already making a living as a lawyer. I can try to keep this pure and do it for the right reasons, and follow the truth. And that's a luxury. That's a luxury, because, as you said, I think in a lot of news outlets, they don't have that luxury. They have to play it a certain way, because that's what their viewers expect. If they don't do it, they lose viewers. And in the meantime, objectivity and the truth suffer as a result. If you're a politician, you don't get the small dollar donations and whip up enthusiasm by being reasonable and moderate and trying to find solutions. You do it by appealing to people's emotions, getting them mad, getting them worked up, and then they'll send you money. And you see that on both sides, where being reasonable just doesn't seem to be a path to fame and fortune and political success. And so I don't know what the answer is. For me, I just kind of ignore it all. A lot of it for me at this point is just noise. I just want to spend time with my family and investigate cases and write about crime, because I feel that that's one area where people from all sides can mostly agree that we want to know what the truth is, and we want to see justice achieved. Don't you sometimes get the feeling that we're all being played?
100%. 100%. I don't believe in the left and I don't believe in the right. I think they both serve the same master if you go up the line. Whoever's in control pulling those strings. I've been trying to figure that out. What needs to change for things to get better? You know, it's
I
just
agree. I just want to do my stories and be left alone. I just don't pay much attention anymore to the comings and goings of the politicians and the political rivalries and the divisions. I don't find it very interesting. It's
yeah,
just noise to me.
yeah, yeah. It's all garbage, but live and learn, you know. But listen, I've kept you on here quite a bit. I wanna thank you for coming on and sharing. I don't have as much reading time these days because I used to do my reading on the subway. That's like my time to read, and it's where I did all my reading and stuff. At home, I don't do it as much as I'd like to, but I definitely want to look into the book and check it out. And you know, it sounds interesting. Yeah. Thanks for coming on. And if you have anything you want to share in closing for the listeners in terms of where to find the book, any social media they could connect on, please.
Well, if you're interested in hearing more, you can Google the Berman Murders and find lots of material about the book. I'm Doug Kari. My last name is spelled Kari, and DougKari.com is my website. I'm on Facebook, Doug Kari Author, Instagram, at Doug Kari Authors. Please look me up, and I would love to connect with you and take a look at what I've got. There's some interesting stories in there, newspaper articles I've written, blogs about a variety of cases.
Awesome. Dude, thank you so much for your time. And
All right, Angel, thank you.
yeah.
Take care.
All right, take care. Thanks again.
Thank you.
You are listening to the NYC Talking podcast. www.nyctalking.com. Please like NYC Talking on Facebook. Please follow Angel R. Talk on Twitter and Instagram. We are NYC Talking, the realest lifestyle blog ever. Thanks for listening.